Welcome back to the second session of CentreCourt. We just had a fantastic careers panel with a number of the top European business schools. It's must viewing for anybody that really wants to sort of understand that transformational journey that you go through during the MBA and the role that the career services team to support that. Admissions, of course, is the other focus of CentreCourt, and I really feel very lucky to have so many outstanding professionals in the industry that are joining us. This panel is no exception, and I'm delighted to welcome Virginie Fougia, who is Director of Admissions at INSEAD, the Global Business School for the World, who I think will be sharing perspectives not just from a campus in Fontainebleau, but of course Singapore, Abu Dhabi, and then that new research center that they've just opened in San Francisco. With her, and another foothold in Southeast Asia, is Emily Price, who's the Senior Director of Admissions at the Asia School of Business, this fascinating partnership between MIT Sloan and one of Southeast Asia's biggest banks. Emily's actually joining us from California. Thank you, Emily, for getting up so early. Brandon Kirby, the Director of MBA Admissions at the Rotterdam School of Management, who is himself a force for positive change. And Brandon, I know that's very much part of the sort of characteristics that you're looking for in the top talent that applies to RSM. And Joel McConnell, the Executive Director of Recruitment and Admissions at the Imperial College Business School, both for the full-time MBA, Joel, of course, and the global online MBA and many other specialized masters. So thank you, all four of you. I know that this is a year unlike any other. Perhaps as an industry, you're putting in long hours, fielding so many questions, and really appreciate you taking the time to share your perspectives. I thought that we'd just take the first few minutes of the panel, really to get a sense of what you're seeing. When we looked early in the year, top European and Asian business schools like yourselves were seeing incredibly strong demand for your MBA programs. US schools had seen 2 or 3 years of decline. I think, messaging around H-1B visas and the uncertainty that had created. And, with such a strong ROI from these top European programs, you were one of the main beneficiaries. And then COVID, and that's changed everything. But Virginie, perhaps we can start with you. And for a program that has both a September and a January class start, can you talk us through the last few months, what you're seeing for the intake in September, and then further beyond that?
Last few months and last few weeks have been a little bit, hectic to say the least. And this is, as you know, I've been in this industry for about 20 years now. And this is very interesting to observe and see that, in fact, what we have been forecasting, what we have been planning for a few months is totally to be revised and to just thrown away. And we can go back to the drawing board and feel, okay, if we do this and if we do that, how is that going to impact our applicants and our students? So this is incredibly challenging, but at the same time, I love this opportunity to adapt, adjust, reinvent, challenge the statu quo, because this is what it is at the moment. I've been in this industry for a number of years, and yet this is ever changing, and this is keeping us on our toes and feel, okay, what can we do? How can we serve applicants? How can we adjust, and even more so with this current situation?
Of course, INSEAD is perhaps unusual among the top schools. You have 2 intakes in September and then in January for an extraordinarily intensive drinking water from a fire hydrant sort of experience that you provide, both in the classroom and outside with everything else, clubs, treks, National Week. There's so much that goes on. Just as you're working with the current intake for September, there's a tremendous amount of flexibility of extended deadlines that you're working with, GMAT, GRE scores, given that test centers are closed. Perhaps you can just speak to that audience for September. and then those looking further ahead into January and beyond?
Yes, so indeed, we've quickly realized that this situation, this COVID situation, was not allowing applicants for any business schools to apply on time or to have not only the GMAT or the GRE, but also their transcript of grades from their university, their undergrad university, sent out to us because the universities were shut down, or that it was a lot more difficult to get a letter of recommendation because people are busy. How can you ask someone to write a letter of recommendation in this very uncertain times? So this is why we've quickly extended deadlines. We have also turned quickly to interviews via virtual interviews, via any sort of channels, Zoom, Skype, like this, because we require face-to-face interview in normal times with alumni, and we quickly realized that it wasn't possible. As you said, fortunately we have a September intake and a January intake. So people who feel that indeed the September intake could be way too challenging or stretching or too uncertain, then they could fall back on the January intake, indeed. And we can touch on this topic a bit later, but we are also considering delaying slightly the start of the September intake by a few months, but happy to have my colleagues share their view as well on the situation.
Right. And I guess, I mean, it's impossible for any of us to predict with two campuses, a situation might change in Singapore and things open up there versus here in Europe. Brandon, of course,
and
you're
future
working
travel bans.
Yes, which when you're bringing in typically 92 nationalities to a typical INSEAD classroom, that's a lot of people coming from all over the world. Brandon, similarly international, and of course with a January class start. But perhaps before we look at that intake, as you look at your current students, you're a very close-knit community. Are you seeing the demonstration of that with current students in terms of the solidarity between them? That they've been forced to stay home and do their learning online. Has that reinforced the sort of qualities that you had seen in them when you admitted them into the program?
I think a lot of what we look for, like most schools on the way in, is resilience. And it's very hard to gauge that in the interview process. You can ask questions for examples of things in their past, but they're stories and they're in the past. There's no, I think, better example of how resilient someone is, either as an individual or a class, than what we're going through now. And so from that perspective, it's a great opportunity, and I put that in quotes. It's obviously not a great opportunity, but it's a good opportunity for us to really see how resilient these students are. And let's not forget that they're not all here in Rotterdam. Many of them, like most schools, went home. And so they're not just on campus or nearby campus here in Rotterdam. You have people who are attending online classes at odd hours of the day or night because they're in different parts of the world. So it adds an extra dimension of complexity to learning. So I think that it's almost like a group therapy for them, because they're going through it together. The MBA experience is normally a shared experience to begin with, but now more so than ever, they're able to help themselves through, because let's be honest, for a lot of them, the MBA experience they envisioned is not the reality that we live in now. And I think that, like anything, there's been different points along the way, along that ride of frustration and anger. And now we're getting to that point of, okay, this is what it is, and let's work together to move forward. And I think similarly, resilience on students who are applying, it used to be once you were accepted to your school of choice, the party could begin, right? You were excited and you're looking forward to it. But now the goalposts are being moved, because now you're starting to ask yourself, well, I'm on the clock for this decision I need to give back, but will the program happen on time? Will it happen online or in person? So one set of anxiety is traded for a different set of anxiety, perhaps. And so I think that's what you're hearing from the schools. Virginie just mentioned it. I'm sure Emily and Joel might as well, of the ways that schools are trying to react to that and to be able to provide to reduce some of that anxiety. So, but to answer your question, yes, I think people are definitely coming together no matter where they are in the world. And I think that's one of the biggest keys to classes, not just at RSM, but at any school for getting through these challenging times. Yeah.
You had seen the last 3 or 4 years, you've seen double-digit growth in application volume to the full-time MBA program at RSM. And you're continuing to see strong demand even during this period, right?
Yes, that's correct. If I look at application volume, it's up well over 60%. I think part of that is because people have more perhaps time on their hands to be able to think about it. I think for me as a director of a school, interest is great, but we need to see what happens at the end of the cycle, right? Because I think there's a lot of people who would like to do a program, but there'll be concerns of finances and jobs, a lot of the things that I mentioned just a few moments ago. But interest has definitely gone up significantly for us, which is fantastic. And we've already have a very strong start to our cohort, which is ahead of even last year. So despite everything that's going on, there are some silver linings. So we're still excited about that, but we just need to see what the next few months brings, you know, because a lot of the questions we get as admissions directors or admissions managers are things that we're unable to necessarily answer with certainty. And I think that's some of the challenges we face. So of how do you respond to someone who asks, well, would your classes be online or in person, or will they be 1.5 meter distancing? You do the best you can, but you know, that answer might change tomorrow. So, but yeah, we are definitely seeing increase in interest, applications and registrations. Mm-hmm.
Emily, we had on the admissions, one of the admissions panels yesterday, Rod Garcia, the Associate Dean of Admissions at MIT Sloan, back in Cambridge, Massachusetts, who said, you know, that this will prove to be a great time to go back to business school, you know, as we you know, think about the challenges that the world faces to emerge, you know, a year or two from now with the skill sets, the network, all of the elements that you contribute. So what are you seeing from a Southeast Asian perspective for the Asia School of Business and this fascinating pioneer program that launched just a few years ago?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so I think, you know, I'll echo quite a few of the sentiments of my colleagues, but I would just, I guess, put things in perspective a little bit for ASB. Obviously, we're a relatively new school. We are about 5 years old at this point. So I think some of the challenges that we've been facing over the last few years have kind of set us up for the agility kind of needed in this kind of environment. Nothing has really looked the same for us since we started the school. But I you know, definitely continuing to see increased interest. I think our message still resonates generally, you know, as a young school, as an unconventional program, people that are sort of willing to take some risks. That's kind of built into the, I guess, implicitly kind of built into our process already. So I think, you know, we're really excited about the class that's being built for the fall. We do only have one intake. So I'd say, you know, a lot of the challenges right now are around scenario planning for a fall start. Scheduling and the sort of nature of our program, there's a heavy travel element involved. We're heavily international, so we're bringing students in from all over the world. Every semester, they're working on projects in a different country in Southeast Asia. So the whole dynamic of the region, you know, kind of the uncertainty around that is definitely a challenging environment to navigate in terms of giving people certainty around what to expect for the fall. But I think we're very committed to still having a fall start date, whether that be partially digital initially. We're still accepting applications at this point as well. And I think, you know, overall, I think, you know, we're well positioned to still attract the kind of talent that we're looking for. And we're excited to see what happens, obviously, with the flexibility needed from everyone around, you know, exactly what the experience is going to look like come the fall.
Right. And often, you know, we think about those exciting early days and weeks as you meet all of your classmates. You know, people they receive letters from any 4 of your schools, and that thrill of imagining, you know, what lies ahead, presumably both in still accepting applications for the fall and the flexibility working with applicants, but even when they do join you, whether it's digitally and perhaps reserving some of those class events to later in the program to ensure the same sort of building of a spirit and a collective cohort that's not going to go away.
Absolutely. So sort of our scenario planning right now is, you know, if we can't do an action learning track in Vietnam in the fall semester. Do we push that to the next semester? We have, a visit to MIT that's a month long. We have industry tracks in China and the US. So we're sort of looking at how do we ensure that overall experience still happens, potentially just in a very different delivery method that it was for some of the previous classes.
Right. Joel, a lot of coverage from Imperial College that is helping to define government response to the pandemic. And it speaks to that sort of overlap of science, technology, and of course, where the business school fits in all of that. And you've also invested heavily in EdTech and an online platform. How has that helped you? And what have you been seeing in the last few weeks as you look at bringing in the class for September?
Yeah, great. Yeah, Matt, listen, I think we were watching quite closely what would happen with our weekend MBA. So we have 4 different MBA programs, and the final intake of the year happens in April. So coinciding pretty much right with the move to containment measures here in the UK. And so positively, this was the first residential program that had to move to a remote induction and first few days in the program. And typically for these sort of weekend programs, a lot of the interaction is face-to-face, and that's what students are excited about. And what we saw was that numbers weren't really affected. I think the resilience bit that was talked about before, we certainly saw that with our weekend MBA students. And we didn't see a lot of dropouts related to coronavirus. So that was very positive, and we were sort of anxiously awaiting to see what would happen with that program. So I think what we're seeing from candidates is a real commitment to continuing focus on professional development and continuing with their studies. Like many of the other schools, I think that given the one-year model continues to be an attractive option for students worldwide, and given despite the practicalities of Brexit negotiations, I think that some timely government policy around stay on to work policy for full-time students who do their master's degree in the UK, and of course, due to the program and faculty and the research we're doing, we saw about 30% growth in applications year on year for our full-time program, as well as the online. And so there was lots of interest. And so, we were excited about what was happening with, interest from the marketplace. We were quite, happy to see what happened with the weekend MBA. But right now, like many other schools, we're looking at what happens if we can't go back to a full-time delivery in September. And so a lot of the work we're doing today is taking advantage of the early investment that was put into the EdTech lab, so the Educational Technology Lab at Imperial College Business School, that was sort of the unit that built out our online curriculum and delivery of MBA programs, but certainly today is leading the way in taking our full-time programs to remote delivery. So the strategy, at Imperial College Business School has been, stabilized, moving everyone en masse. That includes the full-time MBA students, but all those other students are starting full-time with us to a remote delivery scenario. And so that's the stabilized bid. Now we're in the phase where we're sort of enhancing that move to an online delivery or a remote delivery of what would otherwise be a full-time program. And in September, we kick off with sort of the innovate aspect. And again, the way online MBA programs are developed, the methodology and the curriculum and the pedagogy is different from a full-time program. So just taking a full-time program into Zoom delivery is not the same thing, and the programs weren't designed to be delivered that way. So you need to stabilize when everyone's put in that same situation. It's a global pandemic. But then think about how do we quickly enhance that experience so students that are used to a full-time program can feel like they're still getting good value for that time they're investing in the program. And then as we look at what might happen in the future in the different scenarios, what we're preparing for right now at Imperial College Business School is looking at sort of a multimodal approach where we can do some full-time delivery, look at options for live streaming options for students that can't or don't want to or don't feel comfortable being on campus yet, and then having also an online offering that would happen in parallel. So again, we're looking at a multimodal approach and working with different technology partners to allow that to happen. But again, when you have an international program, such as all the schools in the panel today, offering online is great, but then, when do you choose, practical aspects? What time do you deliver classes at if someone's in Tokyo, but they're also in San Diego? And where do you find that happy medium? So interesting times, no less. But I think that, we're continuing to see quite a lot of resilience and commitment to their studies from a candidate perspective. And I think EdTech proved to be and is proving to be a wise investment for the school.
Well, if your applicants are as dedicated as Emily, waking up in the early hours in California to join this panel, some of that synchronous and asynchronous learning. With the panels we had yesterday, we had Wharton, MIT, Sloan, and some of the other top US schools. Those US schools have had a quasi-obsession with the GMAT in the last 5-10 years. In fact, an M7 dean about 18 months ago insisted that the GMAT scores of their school would increase by more than 10 points over a 12-month period. Compare that to the top European business schools like yourselves, and in Asia, typically your class profiles 2-3 years older, bringing that breadth of experience into the classroom. Now, the GMAT or the GRE still matter. You want to see that they have the number skills to get through discounted cash flow, all of those core courses in the curriculum. But you've shown great flexibility given current conditions, closed GMAT test centers. And Virginie, in your case, you've just taken the new home-based GMAT test, still managed to keep your score at 780, very impressive. Just perhaps your impressions of on home testing, how you will then use those results within the school as part of this wider picture of flexibility in the coming months to recognize the situation people find themselves in.
Yes, this is really interesting because it could, this whole situation could help applicants understand that when we say that we don't necessarily require a 700 GMAT to be admitted at INSEAD or in any of the European schools, we actually mean it. At least for us, the GMAT comes as an additional data point to understand the academic capacity, but it's never isolated and it's never an element that will guarantee admissions. And we are happy to be convinced by what seems a lower GMAT compared to the average. We are happy to be convinced by the rest of the elements, and this is the reason why very quickly when GMAT and GRE test centers closed down, we decided to still review applications and have this process. We knew people needed to have some sort of reassurance on their application form, even though they weren't unable to take the test. So we went on. It doesn't mean that we will waive the GMAT, but or the GRE, but we wanted to really to explain to applicants that there are other elements that are very important to us, like the personality, like the contribution, like the achievements, and international mindset and things like this. So we did review applications without those scores. And so what we did is that we went back to the transcript of grades. We went back to achievements outside the academic background, because there are many different ways of demonstrating that you can attend and successfully graduate from a one-year program, like time management, being able to deliver a project with time constraints is clearly what we want to see, and why we use the GMAT. It's time management, it's this sort of working under pressure, and this is in addition to what a GMAT or a GRE score can give us. And this you can find example in the professional context and also in extracurricular activities. So we quickly went on to this. Now, reassuring applicants that yes, they may not get the best score, or at least the score that they had aimed for, because the structure of the test will be slightly different. The way they had prepped for it will be different. But this is totally understandable. Nobody will require you to achieve exactly what they had hoped for or worked for or prepared for under different conditions.
So in the practical case, you've pushed your round 2 deadline for January. It was originally in the first week of May. Now it's in the last week of May, and subsequent dates that have all moved back by between 1 and 3 weeks. Would your advice be then, you know, if you had intended to apply for May and take a GMAT or a GRE test in the test center conditions rather than home-based testing, to stay with that plan and then look to provide you with that demonstration of a test score later in the summer?
Yeah, why not? Why not, indeed? Why not? Because not everyone will be comfortable testing at home with the solution that GMAT and GRE have developed, even though they are very close to what was the real the experience. It's similar to the experience when people were practicing from home at home for the practice test. So it's kind of similar. But yes, if the person feels that he or she still needs to be put in a room with a different setting and not be at home, then fine for delaying a little bit the submission of the results. This is perfectly understandable.
So the GMAT, of course, gives this iconic scale up to 800, but a number that really matters to you, Brandon, I think is 17, which is the number of United Nations SDGs, which is something that the program has embedded into both the curriculum, the campus, even I think your staff reviews, right?
Yes.
So the role of the GMAT, Virginie talked about a more holistic process and the different elements, you know, when we talk about a force for positive change. So perhaps, you know, how do you place GMAT and GRE tests in context with, you know, those other characteristics, resilience and other things that you're ultimately looking for in applicants?
You know, it's been an interesting experience, no different than some other schools. We also offer different alternatives for the GMAT. And what's been interesting to note is that we have had individuals who have applied with us that wouldn't have applied otherwise. So in other words, the GMAT was really the hurdle for them to want to submit their application. And so these are individuals that, you know, maybe have CFA level 3 consultants, people who have really interesting profiles that either because of time, in some cases money, right, you know, to spend on taking the GMAT. So what I've seen, first of all, with these alternatives is that we have a wider pool of applicants who are applying, that when we speak with them say, listen, you know, thank you for your flexibility. Thank you for considering what's going on in the world. I wouldn't have applied before. You know, students who've been in our contact list for 2 years are coming back and saying, hey, listen, you know, I think this is an interesting time. And some of that is coming from the GMAT. So it just goes to show the level of anxiety that is sometimes surrounded by the GMAT. Now, as you pointed out, Force for Positive Change is the mission statement for RSM. So while the GMAT or GRE is definitely part of that, embedded even in the admissions process, we very much are curious about the character of the individual and have they had the opportunity to be a force for positive change in their world, or is that what they're looking to do kind of after the program? It's not that we necessarily look to graduate the next you know, executive director of an NGO, although that's perfectly fine if that's what something that someone wants to do. So a lot of what we focus on in the interview is really how they helped others, the things that they've learned along the way. You know, the GMAT for me, yes, we need to make sure that they're able to handle the program academically. But, you know, I'll be the first to say that we've had plenty of candidates who have come through and had less than stellar GMAT scores. And I was working on a project recently before all of this happened, where I took the past 5 years of students who were registered and went through the program, and I looked at their incoming GMAT with their outgoing GPA. And I won't get into all the details, but there was some interesting correlations or non-correlations. So I think that, yes, there is a certain level that really sort of indicates whether someone will be successful in the program to pass their classes. But the things that really propel someone to the front of the class, to the top of the class, isn't just smarts, right? It's, again, being able to handle stressful situations. It's being able to see the opportunities in everything. And the GMAT, and not for its own fault, I mean, the GMAT doesn't test that. That's not what it's designed for. I think that what this situation will do is it will cause a lot of business schools to step back and to really say, look, you know, we need to look at other things as well beyond the GMAT to make sure that we're finding the right individuals for our program. So again, always try to look for silver linings in situations. And so I think that what we're experiencing now is really giving us a moment to reframe that conversation. Yes, to include some sort of standardized testing, but to really widen the scope and to pull that focus back so that we're looking for those other skills that are truly going to showcase what makes someone resilient in the program.
Right. You remind me that I think there's another great study that shows that applicants taken off the wait list often go on to pursue extraordinarily successful, success is a relative term, but great careers, being given that chance and how they then grasp that opportunity. It speaks to what you were saying on the GMAT. Emily, as you define the sort of the personality of the Asian School of Business, of course, people will look at the admissions criterion at MIT Sloan, but you're in a very distinct position in Southeast Asia. All of our schools on this panel are all incredibly international. So, beyond test scores, are you trying to identify the sort of international credentials and the global mindset for the applicants applying to your program?
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually we put a lot of thought sort of at the forefront of before we launched our first intake in terms of what's the mindset, what's the skill set that we're looking to recruit for ASB. So we've actually been GMAT optional since the beginning. We look at a lot of different markers to sort of consider evidence around academic readiness. And, we are looking at sort of success in your own context, the quality of your school and in sort of your context, the rigor of your program and previous degrees. But I think broadly speaking, we're looking at a lot more than that. I think in addition to a lot of the things that my colleagues have mentioned, one sort of differentiator for ASB is just around, we're obviously in a different location than maybe people are typically considering a global MBA. And we're really looking for people that sort of have that frontier mindset, that see that as an opportunity to come be on the ground in Asia, specifically with a focus on kind of experiential learning, a willingness to really roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty. And that definitely takes a certain, in some ways our program's quite self-selecting. I think the tempo and the pace of the program looks very different from other programs. And, you have to have a willingness to come, roll up your sleeves and really be on the ground doing project-based work, in environments that are likely very, very out of your comfort zone. So, we're looking of evidence of kind of willingness to take that risk and kind of perform under those types of, I guess, very unconventional circumstances in past experience as a kind of proxy for success in our program.
Right, and for our viewers, there is an interview with an ASB alum later on, an entrepreneur from Boston, who clearly the action-based learning that you emphasize, for him wanting to be able to immediately apply his learning absolutely resonated, and I think will continue his very successful entrepreneurial career. Joel, with your background in admissions, of course, you've worked at several of the top schools. Is there, as we look at the current conditions, we've all been at home for 6, 7, 8 weeks, and by the time we've watched everything there was to see on Netflix, now it's time to get up off the couch. Will you be looking at a sort of a COVID attitude? You're looking for individuals that take initiatives, that are proactive. Do you think that you'll see emerge in the next generation of applicants? Well, what did you do during the lockdown that reinforces the sort of characteristics that you're looking for?
Yeah, no, I think certainly, how that resilience of character translates into actions that will allow them to continue forward and sort of change the way they work. Certainly something will be relevant, I think, for admissions essays going forward. And certainly will be a topic of discussion for classes kicking off in fall, how you adapted. And certainly for students that were coming to a professional program, how did your organization adapt and how did leadership adapt to the transition to COVID-19? I think one of the things that is interesting right now is that given this move to sort of a digital only kind of environment, it's important to not forget the human touch as well. And so I think, for candidates, I have to give some advice here. First and foremost, media organizations are working very closely with business schools to make sure there's ample feedback from the schools on how we're evolving and what's special about our programs and what kind of students we're looking for. So candidates would be smart to do a quick research or stay on top of media on sort of a regular basis of what the schools are sharing via their media partners. And certainly I'm sure all of us here are sort of putting out information that also features students and alumni. We work with a tech startup called Unibuddy. And I think what we try to do with Unibuddy is add an additional sort of human context to that process, certainly for candidates that are thinking about applying or that are coming through the application process. where we match applicants with current students or alumni, so they can get sort of firsthand thoughts and opinions on what is it like to go through the process, what is it like to study at an institution, how are you benefiting as an alumni. And so, I think it's important to make sure you're adapting to an online testing environment, and sort of thinking about later, once we've passed COVID-19, what are the learnings and how did I adapt, and what did I learn from my organization and how leadership behaved that I can then take to the classroom for discussions. But also coming back to the short term is, am I choosing the right school or program, and how are the schools connecting me with other people who can give me a good read for whether I'm a good fit and it's worth putting in the effort, given the current situation, to continue forward study plans.
So there's every chance that next year, of course, we will see a real jump in application volume. Virginie, that may unsettle people thinking, well, your top schools are already selective enough. Perhaps some words of encouragement for anyone that's looking to apply in the next year, just about what they can do, obviously, to do the best possible job, how they present themselves. Also, if perhaps specifically, the school continues to make progress in terms of the gender balance that you're achieving in the MBA classroom, and none of the top business schools would want to lose the momentum of more, this pipeline of talented women looking at business school as their next step. So perhaps words of encouragement, whether they're gender neutral or, just making sure that applicants, recognize the opportunity that they have applying for the next year.
This is a very interesting question, because indeed, people who had targeted the January intake might wonder, well, if we change the way we were selecting before, because we have to adapt to the current situation, what does that mean for me as a prospective applicant? I think here is we will stay true to our values, and the mission of INSEAD will remain: how do we bring people together from different culture, from different environments, to have this rich interactions and this exchanges in the class and outside the class. So I think it is still very important to demonstrate how you can contribute and what are your key unique features in your background. I think this will remain. We will definitely keep the same values. We will also make sure that we can respond to the market. So if people are just worried by a question of class size or whether we can have less or more students, to be very honest, the discussions the deans and the board are having at the moment are very interesting, to the point that they are even considering having smaller class earlier, or a larger class later, or adding online modules to be able to accommodate everyone. That is to say, the bottom line is that we will not block someone from benefiting from the program, as long as the skills and the match is there. We will make sure that we adapt by giving deferrals, by growing class size, or by going with some online modules for those who want. So this is the type of discussions we are having at the moment, rather than being a barrier and reviewing the standards, is more adjusting to be able to accommodate the demand.
And given likely applicant volumes next year, it's still making sure that you're looking to see a very thoughtful application. That when you think about some of the areas where people let themselves down, is it their resume? Is it the way perhaps that they've portrayed their background or their future goals? What are some of the common pitfalls you often see?
At INSEAD, it's usually people who haven't done their due diligence in terms of looking at the unique feature of the school. I'm a strong believer that it's not one size fits all, and that we have an offering, we have a value proposition, and not everyone will feel comfortable at INSEAD. And when I read essays where I see that the person hasn't understood the value proposition in terms of intensity, in terms of international mindset, in terms of agility and things like this, I feel, well, maybe we're not the best school for this person, and we're not answering what this person is looking for. Hence this idea of having this match. I think it's really, really important, and to demonstrate that you can bring food for the discussion in the classroom and outside the classroom, and ideas for brainstorming, for challenging your thinking, for pushing people in their ideas, and challenging their preconceptions sometimes. So this is what we do in admissions, is we bring people that can challenge your thinking, and usually in the essays, when I see canned answer, people not being true to themselves and staying very superficial or kind with a perfect template or perfect mold, I feel, well, this is a missed opportunity to really show who you are.
Yeah, that sort of authenticity and vulnerability. Now, Brandon, let us into a secret. When you have somebody's resume in front of them, their CV, do you stop at the top, or do you read all of those interesting details about being able to play B.B. King on the guitar down in the bottom, those extra hobbies and interests?
You know, it's funny. I actually usually start at the bottom, because oftentimes for me, it's the first question I ask in an interview, just to sort of calm the nerves. And so whether it's, hey, I see you sung opera, that's interesting, talk to me about that. Or you backpacked across the Himalayas, what was that experience like? And then slowly start in, to the interview. And I think that when you're thinking about, competitiveness and is it going to be more competitive, I think the things to think about remain unchanged, right? So tell us a story, tell us about the outcomes. Oftentimes I think candidates in their essays and in their interview answers really focus on what happened. So I had this project and it was this and it was that, as opposed to really putting the emphasis on, and this is what I learned. Because that's really what we want to see in the classroom, because it's something we expect for them to be able to share within the classroom. So I think that that's definitely one thing that candidates can do is to really tell us about those outcomes and to really to be honest about it. And I think that that's okay to show some vulnerability. That's what the essays are for, especially, and I think that's what the interviews are for you to really be able to showcase who you are. And I think that that's something, no matter whether it's, this year, 5 years ago, or 5 years from now, I think that's really something that's important, is to talk about outcomes and what you learned.
Right. And irrespective whether application volumes jump 15, 20, 30% next year, whether it's opera singing or the outcomes of a professional project, I mean, you're looking for diversity in profiles. So it's not like they're competing with everybody else in the applicant pool anyway, right? In terms of individual stories.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think oftentimes candidates seem to get caught up in who is the ideal candidate we're looking for. And if you ask that question of a business school, I can almost guarantee you that there are certain things that we like to see, but there's not a mold we're trying to stamp. And it can be very difficult, because as a candidate, I can completely understand you're doing everything you can to elevate yourself above the others around you. And how can I showcase that I'm different, and what is it that the school is looking for? And oftentimes I think that it's more important to really, whether it's the application, the essay, the interview, for me, it's more important to spend more time thinking about it than either writing it or doing it. So especially when it comes to an essay, for example, spend more time thinking about the answer to the question than the time that it actually takes to write the answer. right? So the time that you take to really think about things, about why you want to do an MBA, why you want to go to any one of the schools here on the panel or anywhere else in the world, the time that you spend thinking about it, kind of in your own head, I think will pay its dividends when you go to write an essay, when you go into an interview, because you've already thought about it. And it comes more conversational when you're having those responses. So I think that don't be too tied up with what a school wants, because if you look at the class profiles of almost any school, they're super diverse, from a lawyer to an artist to a musician to a consultant. You'd be really hard pressed, at least on the outside, to see, what is that common theme? Oftentimes it's the things you can't see. We talked about it time and again: resilience, willingness to learn. What's your emotional intelligence like? What is your global mindset like? So it's those kind of things, less so than where you worked and what you did and what you want to do afterwards.
Emily, Brandon talks about, not falling into that trap of, well, what does the school want to hear? Virginie, talked about that importance of sort of the authenticity and your personal story. Many schools will ask about what post-MBA career plans might look like. And some applicants say, well, if I say consulting, that won't sound memorable enough, or, whatever their plans, how will that come across to the school? I mean, the reality is they'll spend an extraordinary experience, transformational, with a very diverse, talented bunch of their classmates, and could end up doing something wildly different anyway. So, even around the sort of the post-MBA career plans, how do you place those sort of responses in context?
And so that's a great question. We consciously don't ask that question as part of our evaluation process. I think we believe that our program is so transformational that whatever you tell us in an interview process is very unlikely to be the case by the time that you graduate. Not that people can't express their passions and their interests. We absolutely want that to come through the interview. We want that to come through the application, but we're not looking for a detailed roadmap of exactly what you're planning to do when you graduate. I guess a couple other elements that I would touch on in terms of our application process or our evaluation process is that we do have a video component to our application. I think that's a unique opportunity for people to, be able to project what they want us to know about their background beyond sort of what else we might read in their written application. And so, we always encourage people, we're not looking for highly produced, edited video, but we are looking to get to know you better through that application element. And I'd say the other thing, from a kind of culture fit standpoint for ASB that we're really looking to sort of see come through the evaluation processes. Collaboration is really key. And I know, this probably goes for most programs, but the nature of the program is residential. It's a relatively small cohort. So we're looking at sort of 40 to 50 students per intake right now. You're living together, you're traveling together, you're in class all day together. And I think there's such a high level of collaboration and project-based work in the program that it's really important for us to understand what kind of team player and sort of what sort of collaborative mindset you're going to bring to the MBA classroom.
Right. Joel, a week ago, an online MBA ranking, which somewhat amusingly still has my name on it, identified Imperial as having one of the world's top online MBA programs. As you look at the admissions process for the full-time MBA program and that classroom cohort versus applying to an online MBA program, are there different mindsets? And perhaps COVID is just added evidence of this generation that will look to online for their experience. But how do you approach it from an admissions perspective? Are you looking for different things?
Yeah, no, listen, I think general things, I would say that online MBA students, the time between when they decide to apply and actually starting the program is probably shorter than, say, full-time students. I think full-time students probably are looking more at 12 to 24 months to sort of make a decision based on research and actually applying and then going through the admissions process. So it's a bit longer of a process there. I would say too that students that take on a online program or part-time program they're brave. Working full-time and doing an MBA program is nothing to underestimate. Whereas the full-time student, I think, is saying, how can I take a year or two out of the workplace and really explore what I want to do next? And so there's a little bit of difference there. I would say online students perhaps are a little more work experience when they join the program as well. The global MBA, which was the one that just came out in the QS ranking, is, it's not quite the level of an executive MBA from a seniority perspective, probably closer to the full-time student. But I think that students who do online programs are looking to probably fast-track leadership progression within their organizations or industries, whereas maybe in the full-time you see much more openness to different experiences and exercises in the program that could lead them on completely different tracks. And that's something that Emily talked about, and I think is absolutely part of the full-time experience. But I think that, fundamentally, students that are coming to an MBA program are coming with sort of a goal in mind, which is to do a program that's going to give them some extra life experience through the different things that, wrap around the actual core academic delivery. But also it's very, career focused, and they seem to have quite a good idea of where they want to go, or at least a range of outcomes they'd like to see from a professional perspective.
So a question for all of you. I asked it yesterday and got quite different responses from some of the top US schools. You've all read many hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. Can you tell when an applicant has enjoyed stepping back, think about next steps, the professional and personal trajectory that they want to take? And if you can see that they've enjoyed it, is that a good thing? Virginie, can you tell if someone, you're a highly selective school, some people are very anxious, will I get my place at INSEAD? Can you tell if they've enjoyed applying to INSEAD?
I think they have. I've asked this question because we are always very careful with adjusting the process and making it a positive experience. Not just because we want people to come, but also because I think it's very important that we project the right image. So along the process, you project the image of the school. So we ask these questions, and people say that they enjoy the self-introspection work that they had to do for applying to INSEAD. And this is one of the reasons why we haven't cut down on the number of essays. There was a trend a few years ago where a lot of business schools were cutting down on the number of essays, going to 0 or 1. And we felt that we couldn't do that because we wanted the people to have this journey that starts from the moment you download the application form and you start thinking, why do I want to embark on this MBA? Why this one? And so we kept that, and also because, as I said earlier, the GMAT is not the sole criteria, or is not the very important criteria for us. Hence, if we go down to one essay, then we have very little information, because again, the GMAT plays a small part in the selection process. Hence, we need to keep this essays. We need to be able to end the video, like Emily said, because this is the only way we can meet people. We can discover who is behind and listen to the story of the person. And this is what is very, very important to us. So we hope that this is the idea behind the process, and that people enjoy it. And we've heard positive feedback about it, indeed, and meeting alumni as well.
Thinking, of course, is that we tend to do our best work, when we enjoy it. Yeah. Perhaps that comes across. Brandon, you obviously look to put interviewees at ease with that initial sort of icebreaker question during the interview. Again, that's an anxious moment to go through interviews. And you can mess up a question, right, and still bounce back and ultimately, have a very fruitful and positive interview with you.
I think the best interviews I've had sometimes are the interviews where someone takes a moment to think of the response. I think oftentimes we feel, even now, that if you ask me a question, that I should be prepared to immediately jump in with this amazing answer, right? And especially if you're doing the interview in a language that's not your native tongue. I think it's okay to take a moment sometimes to breathe in the air and to really think about a really positive or a really good response. Sometimes for me, if I'm interviewing a candidate, the way they can mess up, if you will, is that they're so quick with an answer. And so it makes me wonder, is this really the answer, or did they think this was a question I was going to ask? Maybe this is a question that another school asked. I think the same thing happens sometimes with essay questions. That a lot of the essay questions can be very similar. And so there's really a real reason perhaps people are like, maybe I can get creative with how I respond to these. So I think that especially with the interview, it's okay to take a moment. And it also adds, especially if someone asks you a question where you're able to really deliver something that's personal to you, that really opens up and tells a story, letting that atmosphere in the room sort of breathe for a moment can be really powerful. Because if you're trying to really stand out from other people, when the interviewer comes away from that, you really want to make the impression. And I think that that's one great way that you can do so, is to really contemplate the answer and say, you know what, that's a great question. Give me just a moment. Now, granted, if you do that for every question, that's probably, that's not going to work. But I think for those key moments in the interview where you really have a question that you know that you have a really strong answer for, take a moment, take a deep breath. And I think that's a way, especially if up to that point, the interview hasn't gone the way you wanted it to, it's a perfect moment to get your momentum back and to turn it around.
Brandon, just so that we're clear, I've always set the bar very high for the quality of your answers, and you've never let me down. So, that we don't want that to change anytime soon. Emily, I suppose we talked about creativity, humor. There's place for that, right? It's not trying to, be so narrow. Well, this is what Emily and the team want to hear. That being creative too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I some of the most memorable answers to interview questions that I've had, and again, it's not that you should respond in this nature to every question, but have been people that have taken my question and kind of turn it on its head and sort of adjusted the question to talk about something that's really important to them. And I feel like that is a sign of creativity and thinking outside of the box in a way that, you don't have to be so rigid and kind of mechanically answering every question that I have. This is your opportunity to express to us what makes you unique. And I feel like, you don't always have to be so rigid in terms of how you address interview questions. So I love to see that as part of the process. I think that's a great point.
Well, Virginie has been kindly typing some answers about GMAT waivers, which have come through specific. I think it's probably true that all of you have information on your websites related to COVID-19, the latest updates, deferrals, deadlines, all of those different things. Joel, perhaps just a last question for you. What do you love about your job?
What don't I love about my job? I would say that, I actually entered the graduate management education sector, let's say, as an MBA graduate. I graduated from the MBA in July 2008, another wonderful time for graduating cohorts to enter the workplace. If anyone remembers that little global financial crisis we had. And I was previously in financial services, and the move into this role and this industry was sort of not part of the plan, but it certainly ended up being a great career choice. So what do I love about my job? I think, Emily certainly talked about this, the ability to really do that global engagement with really smart, interesting people from all over the world as part of the regular ongoings of our jobs. I think it's exciting because people that are coming to see you are doing probably one of the most, taking on one of the most impactful, or one of the more impactful activities that they will engage in as part of the professional development. And so it's a very positive memory and very impactful activity for a lot of people. So you're part of that somehow. You're around a lot of bright people doing interesting research and sharing that research with students in the classroom. And I think, at the business schools here anyways, I think that we are very focused on, corporate innovation and entrepreneurship, and that filters into how we run our organizations. And so there's a real focus on how do we continue to deliver at or above candidate expectations, given what has become a very global competitive environment for the very best students. And the last thing I might mention is that I'm a bit of a serial studier. And so I've really taken advantage of that lifelong learning aspect. And so I pretty much studied everything that the organizations where I've worked have let me study. And this morning I got my acceptance letter to my doctoral program. So I'm continuing on. So for all of those people listening today, candidates listening today. It's not an easy time, I think, to decide to continue to study, and from a financial investment perspective, of course, but the time and effort required. But it's worth it, and I've done it over and over again. And I think studying management programs specifically are a good investment.
I think Dr. McConnell has a nice ring to it. Just for our viewers, before we got started an hour ago, of course, admissions officers are always looking at the qualities and characteristics of the applicants applying to their MBA programs. And I had asked our panelists what they thought that the qualities of a good admissions officer were. Emily, it's been lovely to meet you, albeit virtually. I've had the great fortune to share MBA fairs, events, info sessions, videos with Brandon, with Joel, and with Virginie. You all share this quality of people skills and bringing the best out of people. I think in terms of you're encouraging, you help people to find their voices, their stories. You're not judgmental. It's easy to forget what your real job title is. You're not rejection officers, you're admissions officers. And I see that in all of you. I think that's been reflected in the last hour of this panel. And I do look forward to the day when we can do those fairs, info sessions, and all be together again. But thank you for this wonderful substitute and a virtual session together. I hope that, well, already from some of the responses I'm getting through, people have really enjoyed the insights that you've shared. Please stay well. I look forward to seeing you in person very soon. And thank you again for being with us for this panel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt.
Bye.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, everyone.